All right, history buffs, welcome back for round two of our deep dive into modern Indian history. We're gearing this especially towards our UPSC aspirants, prepping for GS1, and of course anyone with a thirst for this pivotal period. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give us a like if you're finding this helpful.
Absolutely.
Last time we explored how education reform was like this essential ingredient in India's journey toward independence and everything that came after 1947. Today we're zeroing in on one specific attempt to reshape that system, the Sargent Plan of Education from 1944.
Okay.
Now, this plan was audacious. It basically said, we're going to reach the same level as England's education system within a generation. We're talking a 40-year roadmap. Ambitious, right? But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were some bumps along the way, some limitations, and maybe even some missed opportunities.
Yeah.
So buckle up, because we're about to uncover the Sargent Plan's fascinating details and what it all means for India's educational journey.
That's good.
To kick things off, I got to ask, why was this plan even commissioned? What was the educational landscape in India at that time?
That's a perfect place to start. The Sargent Plan wasn't some random idea that popped up. It emerged from this growing realization that India's education system needed a major overhaul, something way more comprehensive and inclusive. We had seen earlier attempts at reform like the Sadler Commission in 1917 and the Hartog Committee report in 1929, but the need for a truly transformative plan was becoming increasingly clear.
Hold on, can we pause for a sec? For those who might not be familiar, can you give us a quick rundown on what those commissions were about, just to level the playing field?
Absolutely. The Sadler Commission, appointed in 1917, focused primarily on university education in Calcutta. It highlighted the need for greater autonomy for Indian universities and emphasized a more research-oriented approach. Then the Hartog Committee, which came about in 1929, examined school education in India. It pointed out issues like high dropout rates, inadequate teacher training, and a curriculum that wasn't really relevant to the needs of the Indian population.
Got it. So these earlier commissions laid the groundwork for a bigger, bolder plan, right?
Exactly. They revealed the systemic issues within the Indian education system and set the stage for a more comprehensive vision for reform.
Okay, back to the Sargent Plan. A 40-year plan is a serious commitment. What exactly did Sargent envision for the future of Indian education?
Sargent's vision was nothing short of revolutionary. He genuinely believed that within 4 decades, India could achieve educational parity with England. This meant tackling every single level of education, from pre-primary all the way to university. We're talking a complete transformation, including technical, vocational, and even professional training.
Wow, so not just catching up, but aiming to be on par with England. That's a bold statement, especially considering where India was at that time. But how was this parity even measured back then? What were the specific areas where India was lagging behind?
That's a great question. The idea of parity wasn't just about having the same number of schools or universities. It was about achieving comparable levels of literacy, educational attainment, and quality of education. Back then, India lagged behind England in various aspects, including literacy rates, access to education, particularly in rural areas, the quality of teacher training, and the relevance of the curriculum to the needs of a rapidly changing society.
This is where it gets really interesting for our UPSC folks. Let's break down the plan itself. What were some of the key recommendations to bridge this gap?
The Sargent Plan laid out a comprehensive set of proposals. It started with compulsory and get this free education for children between 6 and 11 years old. This was a huge step toward universal literacy, something that hadn't been attempted on such a scale before.
Free and compulsory education. Sounds like a direct challenge to the existing system.
It definitely was a departure from the prevailing elitist model of education favored by the British.
Okay, so free education for all. What else did Sargent have up his sleeve?
Well, the plan put massive emphasis on expanding school infrastructure, especially in those rural areas where access to education was limited. Then there was a big focus on overhauling the curriculum. The idea was to shift from a purely academic focus to one that also incorporated practical skills. They recognized that a well-rounded education needed both.
That's pretty forward thinking. I mean, today everyone talks about the importance of practical skills. Seems like Sargent was ahead of his time.
Absolutely, and it was a significant departure from the traditional emphasis on rote learning and purely academic subjects. The plan also recognized the crucial role of teachers. It strongly advocated for improving teacher training and professional development programs to ensure that teachers were equipped to deliver this new vision of education.
So we've got free education, expanded infrastructure, a revamped curriculum, and better trained teachers. On paper, this sounds pretty revolutionary, but, and there's always a but, right? What were the limitations of the Sargent Plan?
Well, one of the biggest criticisms leveled at the plan was that it drew too heavily on Western models of education. Critics argued that this could lead to the neglect of India's rich indigenous knowledge systems and cultural heritage. There was a concern that by adopting a Western-centric approach, the plan might inadvertently erode local identities and knowledge systems.
That's a valid point. Was there any acknowledgement of this within the plan itself?
While the plan did advocate for incorporating Indian culture and history into the curriculum, it didn't fully address the concerns about preserving and integrating indigenous knowledge systems. This tension between Western models and indigenous knowledge would become a recurring theme in Indian education policy debates. And let's not forget the practical challenges. Implementing such an ambitious plan, especially in a newly independent nation facing numerous economic and social challenges, was a daunting task.
Right, because it's one thing to have a grand vision, but translating that into reality, especially on such a massive scale, that's a whole other ball game. Were those practical considerations addressed in the plan?
The plan did acknowledge the need for substantial financial resources and a massive effort to train and recruit qualified teachers. But critics questioned whether it realistically assessed the scale of the challenge and the resources required to truly implement it effectively.
So a classic case of easier said than done, perhaps. But even with those limitations, I'm curious how the Sargent Plan was received back then. Was it embraced, or was there pushback?
It's fascinating because the plan actually generated quite a bit of debate. Some saw it as a bold and visionary roadmap for India's educational future, while others viewed it with skepticism, particularly those who felt it was too heavily influenced by Western ideals.
Okay, so a mixed bag of reactions. Makes sense considering the scale and the context. But for our listeners, especially those gearing up for the UPSC, why is delving into this plan so crucial for understanding modern Indian history?
The Sargent Plan, despite its limitations, is a window into the aspirations and anxieties of a nation on the cusp of independence. Remember, India was emerging from centuries of colonial rule, and there was this immense desire to build a new nation, a modern nation. Education was seen as a key driver of that transformation.
So it wasn't just about schools and textbooks. It was about shaping the very identity of a nation.
Exactly. And it reflected the complexities of that era, the tensions between embracing modernity while preserving cultural identity, between aspiring for progress and grappling with the legacies of colonialism. Studying this plan helps us understand those broader historical currents and how they shaped India's post-independence trajectory.
Now, this is where I get really excited, connecting the dots between past and present. Knowing how ambitious the Sargent Plan was, it makes you wonder how it might be viewed today.
Yeah.
What do you think?
It's fascinating to consider how the Sargent Plan's legacy continues to resonate in modern India. On the one hand, India has made remarkable strides in expanding access to education since 1947. Literacy rates have soared and school enrollment has witnessed tremendous growth. Yet those concerns about quality and equity persist, especially in rural areas and among marginalized communities.
So it's a bit of a mixed bag. Progress has been made, but some of those fundamental challenges from back then are still present today.
Precisely. And that brings us back to those criticisms about the plan's potential neglect of indigenous knowledge. Today, there's a renewed emphasis on incorporating traditional Indian knowledge systems into the education system, recognizing the value of diverse perspectives and approaches to learning.
Right, because education isn't just about imparting knowledge, it's also about shaping perspectives and preserving cultural heritage.
Absolutely. And that tension between Western models and indigenous knowledge continues to be a relevant and complex issue in Indian education policy even today.
And what about those concerns regarding resources and teacher training? Are those still relevant in modern India?
Unfortunately, yes. While India has invested heavily in education, the issue of adequate funding, especially for teacher training and infrastructure development, remains a persistent challenge. Ensuring quality education for all requires significant and sustained investment, not just in building schools, but also in equipping teachers with the skills and resources they need to effectively deliver quality education.
It's almost like history is repeating itself in a way. We see these echoes of the past in the present.
That's the power of studying history. It provides us with a framework for understanding the present and for envisioning the future. The Sargent Plan, with its ambitions and limitations, offers valuable lessons for contemporary education policy in India. It reminds us that achieving quality education for all is an ongoing journey, a journey that requires not only vision, but also sustained commitment, resource allocation, and a deep understanding of the sociocultural context.
So it's not just about memorizing dates and names. It's about understanding the complexities, the challenges, and the ongoing quest for an education system that truly serves the needs of the nation. I think that's a great takeaway for our listeners, especially those UPSC aspirants who are digging deep into this period.
Absolutely. And it prompts us to ask, where do we go from here? What kind of education system do we need for the 21st century? One that equips citizens with the knowledge, skills, and values to navigate a rapidly changing world while preserving and celebrating India's rich cultural heritage.
That's a question worth pondering, for sure. But before we wrap up this segment, I want to pose a final thought to our listeners.
Yeah.
How might Sargent himself view India's progress today, both the achievements and the areas where there's still work to be done? It's fascinating to imagine his perspective.
That is a thought-provoking question, and one that invites us to reflect on the complexities of historical legacy and the enduring challenges in the pursuit of quality education for all.
Okay, history buffs. We're going to take a quick breather here, but don't go anywhere. We'll be right back to wrap up our deep dive into the Sargent Plan and explore what it all means for understanding modern Indian history. And we're back, folks. We've spent quite a bit of time with this Sargent Plan, really digging into its vision, its limitations, and really its lasting impact, on the Indian education system.
It's a fascinating plan.
Before we wrap things up, I want to make sure we tie all of this back to our UPSC aspirants. So, for those listeners out there who are gearing up for that GS1 Modern History paper, how does understanding this Sargent Plan, how does it give them an edge?
Well, the Sargent Plan is a really prime example of how social reforms were intertwined with that broader story of India's struggle for independence and its journey, towards nation building. It highlights how important education was as a tool for social change and national development, which is a recurring theme throughout modern Indian history.
Right. It wasn't just about reading, writing, and arithmetic. It was about creating this whole new generation of citizens for a new India.
Exactly. And for those UPSC aspirants out there, it's crucial to analyze the plan within that context, understanding its goals, its underlying ideologies, and its eventual impact on education policy. It provides, valuable insights into this complex period.
So it's not just about memorizing those key features. It's about understanding its place in the bigger picture of modern India.
Exactly. And it's about connecting those historical threads to issues we see in education today. After all, the debates surrounding the Sargent Plan, access, quality, relevance, cultural identity, those are all still relevant today.
Yeah, that's so true. Okay, so a valuable lesson in understanding the past to better navigate the present. I think that's a powerful takeaway for anyone studying modern Indian history, whether you're prepping for the UPSC or just fascinated by this period.
I completely agree.
And on that note, folks, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the Sargent Plan of education. We hope you enjoyed this journey as much as we did.
It's been great.
Huge thanks to all our amazing listeners, especially those hitting the books for that UPSC exam. Remember, this is just one piece of the puzzle. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those brains buzzing.
Absolutely.
And if you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to subscribe and give us a like. It helps us reach more curious minds like yours. Until next time, happy learning, everyone.